got a couple presenters here today joining us. We've got Thomas Johnston from Insight and Brady Nelson from Microsoft. I'll turn it over to Thomas.
All right, thank you so much for introducing us, and you go to the next slide, please. All right, well, this just introduces us a little bit, but I'll introduce myself, and then Brady, I'll let you introduce yourself after that. I work for Insight. I'm one of the principal architects. I've been here at Insight probably around 10 years now. I've been in consulting for well over 20 years. I'm not going to give my total age away there, but I'm nationally focused. Part of our field architecture team on the sales team side of the business. I support delivery and many other areas as well, of course, but my area of main focus is primarily around cloud and data center migrations, anything VMware, automation, and a lot more. I've dive into a number of different areas. Focusing some of those technologies include AVS, Azure Arc, and much more. Brady?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Brady Nelson. I'm a technical specialist on the Azure core side of the house. I'm on the account team in Microsoft, and I support customers in our small, medium corporate industry up in the East primarily. Background in managed service providers, working as systems engineer, systems architect, on-prem, cloud, a little networking, storage, that sort of thing over the years. A lot of hybrid infrastructure is my background, so happy to talk Azure and migrating to Azure.
Awesome, thank you. Could you move to the next slide, please? All right, we just have a quick agenda here. I'll mention we're going to cover the state of the market, cloud migration recommendations and tips, why Insight for Azure, what's a typical Azure journey look like, hybrid cloud kind of focus and framework. How to engage Insight around Azure, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So please hold your questions till the end, and we'll answer anything that you have going there. All right, I'm going to speak to the first few slides here. What's the state of the market kind of look like? A lot of clients are having challenges in a number of different ways. Hopefully, you fit into some of these areas of and have these same challenges. But the majority of our clients have some problems, challenges around data volumes are growing fast. They don't know how to manage all their data. Their data they don't feel like is delivering what the value that they think it should be, especially like in an AI-driven kind of conversation. And many of the organizations indicate that AI is really a huge business driver for them, and they look for efficiencies out of that. I will personally say that almost every conversation that I have these days with a client pretty much starts with AI and ends with AI. We cover a lot of ground in between, but it seems like AI is, the primary thought on most people's minds these days. Next slide, please. And there are plenty of business challenges that come along with that. As a lot of technologies evolve faster, and we're getting to see new types of capabilities, and that requires additional skill sets and even resources, knowledge bases, et cetera, that people just really aren't prepared to either answer or figure out, on their own how do I skill my people up, and how do I continue to leverage the existing skills and those types of questions. Of course, in a time of budget constraints, of course, that's also a challenge. And, cultural alignment around, different parts of your business, different lines of business, IT themselves, and then, of course, technical debt. And one of the things I commonly say is technical debt isn't a new thing. It just seems like it's got more attention these days. But technical debt has been around for my entire career. Decisions you made in the past or your business made are really things that come to be known later. I actually wish we called this business technical debt and not technical debt, simply because these are business challenges that are technical related, don't get me wrong, but they are decisions the business made for good or bad. And now those are coming back to kind of make other challenges that the clients are having to face. And we can help out there. Next slide, please. All right. common misconceptions to avoid along the way of getting into cloud and modernizing. Many people think that you don't necessarily have to have a strategy and it's just porting, or that I need to have a major strategy. You should have a strategy, but the thing is you need to understand that this is a business type of objective, right? And you need to have decisions and make decisions aligned to those businesses that, again, speak to the technology that supports those business goals and objectives. Ad hoc is not really a good approach, so you do need some kind of a plan. Sometimes it's hard to just get started, and maybe that's where we help you out, right? Is figure out, well, what is your plan? What are your business goals, et cetera? And think strategically. While you may have a well-defined plan, set of applications or workloads you want to go after, what you may not realize is, okay, what are the outcomes of moving something from one location platform to another? Maybe there are other implications that you may need to take into account that you're not really thinking about. Like, for instance, how do the users interact with those solutions? I'll give you probably a couple examples here. I was once challenged on, well, why would you move a file server into, AVS, for instance? And I said, well, hey, if the client has their VDI environment also in AVS, then that makes perfect sense to put your files close to those users. And they hadn't really considered that, right? And so those types of aspects of knowing how the business consumes those services, where they consume those services, et cetera, and where your users are and how they interact with those systems and services are critically important before you just start moving things, because you might end up thinking later that you need to pull some things back, and that gets to be pretty expensive to do so. It's also okay to learn in the beginning and to learn in a small way. There's nothing wrong with failing, but failing big is not the goal, right? So my point here is you may want to move in smaller chunks. Let us help identify what the least risk items are to move first. Where do those interact? And kind of when we look at a workload, we don't think of it as just one application. It's how does it spider out and work with all the other pieces and parts along with your lines of business and users. How do they all work together and leverage that workload as a whole? So you start defining those applications or workloads in a larger capacity than just an application running on one server. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is cloud? I mean, well, I think most people probably here can answer what is a cloud, but I still get, surprisingly, once in a great while, someone who thinks that cloud doesn't have infrastructure, and really cloud is servers in a data center, supported in an agile management interface that you can interact with, that then someone else, in this case, Microsoft Azure, support that infrastructure behind the scenes. So it's a shared responsibility. There are lots of pros and cons to this. You need to kind of understand what those are before you really deep dive in and just make a move first. But there's lots of details that you want to kind of think through before you just jump in and move workloads. Happy to help you move workloads if you want, and that's all you need from us. But generally what we find, most clients want us to help them understand why would they pick one workload and move it to a given platform or keep it on a given platform. There's plenty of tools to do that. But the thing is, you need to think that through so you're not kind of surprised around CapEx and OpEx spending and where did it grow or et cetera, and be prepared for those types of things. By the way, deploying to cloud is pretty easy itself. What I mean by that is there are a lot of great tools to help you get moved, Azure Migrate, et cetera. Those tools help fantastically. But the thing is understanding why you would move a given workload and its impacts is the part that's really a little more difficult to figure out and make sure that you're balancing that out. Also think about things like scaling. There are pros and cons of scaling and modernizing workloads. It takes more time, for instance, than migrating. I'll give you another example. For instance, if your goal is to get into cloud, a great way to get to cloud is to, if you're already a VMware shop, to leverage AVS. Because, for instance, you can faster and more easily move into AVS because you're not actually modifying those virtual machines and their workloads themselves. You're just moving them from point A to point P. But if you need to modernize or even go into Azure IaaS, there are other considerations that you want to think about because there are additional challenges, potentially more costs, etc. Whereas AVS might be a simpler roadmap for you to get there. So those are the types of things that we can help you through, and that proper workload alignment and placement with on-prem and in collaboration with cloud gets you the best benefits overall. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to say, for those that aren't aware, AVS is Azure VMware Solution. So that's a partnership between Microsoft and VMware to run VMware vCenter on Microsoft managed bare metal hardware in Azure. So just want to elaborate on that. If anyone,
thanks, Brady. I'm so sorry for
no problem.
I get to using
most
acronyms.
Probably understand the acronym, but we deal with a lot of acronyms.
So, in AVS's case, that's a perfect example of where you're going to continue to use the exact same skills that you have and know today, use the same products you love and know from VMware today, but Microsoft is going to be your first and only point of contact for support for that environment. So you, at that point, if you're running in the AVS environment and consuming those AVS services, vSAN, vSphere, etc., you're going to continue to leverage Microsoft, no different than you would use and you leverage Microsoft for support of Azure. You're going to be calling Microsoft, and they'll answer your questions. Then, if there are challenges, they will then work with VMware to figure out whatever the behind-the-scenes challenge is. All right. Thank you again, Brady, for that clarification.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, migration to cloud. And there are plenty of challenges here, but we can help you answer these. People who don't understand their architecture and principles of that architecture and latency, latency can be a major issue for some workloads. You have to kind of understand what that impact could be, especially if you're not routing your data flows properly, right? So you don't want, for instance, people logging in, authenticating back down to on-prem. You want to make something that's available for authenticating in those that Azure platform itself. That's just a very simple example. But point is, you don't want to have latency for your applications simply because their pathing and their access to data is such that it's adding additional latency. Integrating security platforms can be a challenge. I will say that that's gotten a little bit easier over the years. And you may want to also think about, okay, do you have existing solutions that you have today, security platforms? What I mean by that, it could be firewalls, for instance. Maybe you have a third-party firewall. You might look to see if that's supported in Azure. That way you continue to use your existing skills. But if you choose to use Azure's firewall, fantastic. Be aware that there are some limitations between different types of like AVS. You can't use the Azure load balancer, to my knowledge, still. So that's where we can kind of help out and identify where some of those Azure services are better suited for you, or you can bring many times today a third-party solution and run that alongside of within your Azure environment. Does your team really understand the workloads? And that kind of goes overall of what I'm saying here. You really have to kind of understand how and who and why your workloads exist and how people are consuming them. You're going to need to get input from multiple teams, most likely. And our approach, by the way, at Insight for doing this is we have tools to collect data from the systems themselves, our own IP. But we pride ourselves on not just leveraging that data to make decisions. That's fantastic data, and those systems can tell you plenty about how they're running and what they're running. But you also need to have that human data to marry those two data sets together to really understand and make decisions. And if you just make decisions based upon the system data or some operational data from the system itself, you're really going to probably run into some challenges. I'll give you a perfect example of that is where a client, after I had recommended not placing their FTP servers into Azure, their CIO said, "Are you telling me you can't run an FTP server in Azure?" And I said, "No, that's actually not the case. You absolutely can. It'll run fine there. It's how you're using it's the problem." They were getting images FTP'd, canceled checks, FTP'd to the FTP servers, and then people on-prem were opening each one of those files and reviewing them. And if they had went the way of putting the FTP server in Azure, it would have, one, probably caused some latency problems, slowness for their users, and they would have incurred egress charges that would probably have not been something they were really thinking they would want to do. So luckily, the CIO recognized that immediately and said, this is exactly why we hired you. So we don't just take a look at the system data itself. We want to know how you're consuming and using those workloads, et cetera. And to do that, you need multiple input from multiple teams and marrying that data together. Don't forget about recovery, HA, backups, DR type of planning, et cetera, as you move into cloud. No matter what platform you're in and where those workloads exist, that needs to be thought of. I actually many times think of going to any new platform, including AVS or anything in Azure, as going into a brand new data center. You have to go through those same steps and processes of thinking about how am I going to do basic things like DNS and IP and segmenting networks and firewalls and load balancers and all of those things before you move your first workload, right? Because those workloads require those services to be there once they're migrated there. Now, luckily for you, Azure has a lot of those root fundamental services available, and they're pretty easy to stand up. So you don't have to think about how or which ones you use if you go into Azure. You could just simply use the ones they have or bring your own along if you choose to do that. Automation, definitely, there's pros and cons to both of that, but I'm a big automation guy. So standing up the environment might be automated, or even reporting, et cetera, could be automated. Again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, treating the cloud like a data center. That's what I meant by that earlier, my earlier statements. Changing resources, you can scale those resources. Also think about, if you do certain things when you migrate the virtual machine, those may have impacts on the resource consumption of those virtual machines or those workloads themselves. I'll put another plug in for AVS. If you move from on-prem VMware environment into AVS, the VMs actually stay the same size, where it's not the case if you go into Azure IaaS. I'm not saying there's anything bad with Azure IaaS. My point is just to be aware of how that impacts scaling and resources, et cetera, consumption. Team skills, obviously, if you can bring those skill sets along, great. That's where I look to help clients understand, well, you're already using these solutions. By the way, are you aware that you can already run these solutions, either Pure, NetApp, et cetera, other third parties that already are supported as part of Azure today? You can bring those skill sets and stand up those solutions inside of Azure today and consume them just as you would have before. It's just that now it's in the Azure environment. One thing to think about, since I'm talking about storage deduplication, most of the time, at least to my knowledge, in Azure, the client doesn't see the benefit of deduplication. That's a benefit that Azure gets to see because they actually own and host the storage system themselves. So this is something, if you are currently leveraging deduplication on your arrays internally today and you're saving a lot of storage, be aware that if you migrate that data all of a sudden into Azure, it may rehydrate, I think is the right term. It grows in size, right? Because you're not actually getting to save, you as the client are not getting to save that storage deduplication. Many times people don't think enough about tracking costs and the analysis of that cost. Especially if you're only in an on-prem capacity, you've already paid for all those costs, over the number of years, and you own the hardware and such. But since it's a consumption model to go into any cloud environment, you want to keep an eye on and plan for reviewing and analyzing what are your day-to-day costs, et cetera. All right. One of the other things, by the way, on that, also look at your like for instance with AVS or any others, when you buy your environment, you can buy it in 1 or 3 year increments. AVS, you can actually, for right now, you can buy it in a 5-year increment. And the longer out that you go, there's more savings for you typically. So just be aware of that, your commitment to Azure over a longer duration of time might save you more money as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, so how does Insight differentiate comparative to others? Well, in many ways. One, first of all, we're, I believe, Microsoft's, from what I'm told, Microsoft's largest global partner overall. What does that mean? Well, we can help you out with a lot of things Microsoft related, but like, for instance, licensing can be a big conversation, right? If you need somebody to help you understand Microsoft licensing and work out for what's the best for you as you move to Azure, et cetera, we're the people, because we do more Azure and Microsoft licensing, I believe, than anybody in the world. The other thing is we have a very large bench of Azure folks. Within Insight, we have well over 1,000 Azure developers. All they do is develop in Azure. So if you have app modernization or you want to build out a new application that is leveraging Azure, or even Azure in the edge, if you want, I can talk more about that. But point is we can help you out there. We've been doing Azure and Microsoft work for, I think, as long as Insight's probably been around. We have over 21 Microsoft specializations. I'm one of the guys that helped us attain some of those things. For instance, this year we attained our AVS specialization, and I think we were one of the first 10 globally to attain that. So we really take that as important to be on the forefront of being Microsoft awarded and receiving those specializations. We have dedicated teams across the board in different areas. Of course, Microsoft as well. We can help you with software renewals. You have a single point of contact for those licenses. It'd be us. And we've been Microsoft's partner, designated cloud partner 6 times, I think now, it says here. I will say one thing. We'll see a next slide. If you go to the next slide, I believe it's on the slide. You'll see the number of employees here at Insight and that top bar. It might even be on the next slide as well. But point here is we're continuing to grow. We just actually made an acquisition, probably increased the numbers here by another 1,000 or so, I think, or more people globally. We're just about anywhere in the world. We're based here in the US, in Arizona, but if you need help because you're a global company and you need help in other regions of the world, we absolutely can do that. We're number one on MSP 501 list. So that's fantastic. We're also, I think this year, I don't reflect it in these slides, top 20 best place globally to work, recognized. So I think that's also very fantastic. As I mentioned, we have lots of clients all over the globe. We delivered 4,000 projects this past year. I actually got to believe it's way higher than that. And we have a ton of clients. Unlike many other of our competitors that focus on just a certain set of sized customer, or they got a small customer group that they work with, we, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner here, we have over 15,000 different clients that we work with on a regular basis. And so no matter the size of your company, we can help you out. All right, next slide, please. And Brady, skip it and jump in if you think I'm missing anything here, man.
No, I'll just chime in. Microsoft relies on the partner ecosystem for everything. Insight's an integral part of that. Insight has direct relationships through our partner program to program managers internally at Azure. So we're at Microsoft and on the Azure team. So leveraging partners like Insight, I think, is a great way to get that first step into Azure if you're not already there, or start growing and consuming new workloads. They got the expertise to help you through the journey, so you're not at it alone. So
Yeah. One of the things that I, as my day-to-day job, is it doesn't go by without probably a couple different calls and meetings with folks at Microsoft, and many times those might be calls directly with product management at Microsoft, right? That own those services, and they get input from us and direction. And I'll give you an example. When AVS first came out, and I keep mentioning it because that's an area of expertise for me. But anyhow, when AVS came out about a couple of years ago, we were, I think, critical in changing or helping Microsoft evolve how they related with partners around AVS, kind of helping to put some training and identify where training needs were and programs to support the partners. And one of those programs is called the PAP program. It's Partner Acceleration Program. And that program allows us to have an AVS lab of our own. AVS can be expensive for partners to maintain as a lab. And so Microsoft was wise in seeing that there was a need there. And I think Microsoft has said to us something like only 10 globally in 2023 were selected to be part of that program, and Insight is one of them. So I'm very happy to be a part of that program and working with Microsoft in that case. All right, so as I mentioned, there's lots of, a big size company here. We have 13,000+ employees globally. I suspect it's closer to 15,000 now. I'm not going to read the slides. You guys can read, but we pretty much can cover and help you in any area. What do we do best? Well, we have a methodology that I'd like to say that because we follow it, it really helps out our clients. And it really kind of goes back to stems back to some of the things I was mentioning before. You need to understand what your business needs are, because let's face it, infrastructure, applications, etc., they don't exist if not to help and support business. So if we're not supporting business and we don't know what the business needs are and their goals are and how that aligns to the things that we do with technology, then we're not doing our jobs. So we need to kind of understand that before we really get going. So we need to adopt and build platforms, helping understand where those platforms and edge and where that aligns prioritizes IT technology to meet businesses' goals and their agenda, right? This is all about supporting the business because that's what it's here for. So that's critically important. I think too many people start the process out just looking at the technology or the servers or the virtual machines or the workloads themselves. And when we look at workloads, we think of it as the whole, not just the system itself, right? You need to understand why certain things are already in place and work the way they do and how well. If you don't know it very well, and if you've had people leave or whatever, then we need to figure it out before we're going to actually make changes, et cetera, because we don't want to impact the business. We want to impact the business in a better way, not a drastic way. So we need to understand that first. Okay, then when we do that, we look at it and we say, well, how can we automate some of these day-to-day tasks, right? And make your environment more secure at the same time. That many times can be inclusive of the migration into Azure, right? But you can maybe start looking at some things like Sentinel and other services that you may not have been able to afford or leverage in the past, and now are available to you as part of migrating into the cloud platform. So those are some things to think about. And driving innovation, of course, is critically important as part of that. And AI is going to help you get there in that way. Next slide, please. All right, so I think this might be getting up to the last slide that I'll speak to here because I'm eating up all the air. So our methodology is kind of, at the bottom here. You need to strategize and vision, kind of prove out what you're going to do either through some POCs or testing, and then you accelerate through that and do the migrations and getting your workloads to and your business to where it's at or needs to be, and then you look to how you manage that. All right. So that's kind of our methodology. Next slide, please. And these are all the different areas of expertise that we have at Insight. I'm not going to, again, distill this, but you see that there's a lot of different areas, of course, data and AI, cybersecurity, and modernization of workloads and platforms. All right, next slide, please. And this goes back to kind of that methodology slide, if you will. How do we approach our process? We align with the business and IT. We assess what you have. How are you? Where are you at in maturity of using cloud and other things? We plan the set of phases, and make sure that it's not risky for you. And then we look at those different those R's, right, if you will, and with 7 R's, and we go through and identify, well, these different workloads or systems, where do they fit in? And then we do the migration, and then we look to manage, and then even innovate on top of that later. And that's kind of what the process looks like. All right, next slide.
All right, so I can take over from here, Tom, if you don't mind. And like Tom was alluding to, so we think of it as migration and modernization. So a lot of what we're talking about is modernization. A lot of the prep work and getting to that spot where you're using AI to interact with your data and starting to leverage the cutting edge tooling starts with migration. You can modernize as you go. There's a lot of different ways to get there. But there's reasons sometimes why I like to say, don't let perfection prevent progress. Getting that hybrid landing zone built out, you'll see landing zone referred to a lot when you're looking at Azure documentation and references. Getting that core shared services, that hub, all of the networking security aspects that all of your various workloads are going to tie into. So I think that's kind of the first step, assess it, get prepared to start landing workloads in Azure. And then over time, you'll see how easy it is to start shifting things, lifting and shifting VMs, which we'll talk about, and then potentially modernizing into platform services, SQL paths, getting maybe Azure Synapse in there, Azure Fabric, lots of different data, and then eventually OpenAI integration. So use case for Azure disaster recovery from on-prem. That's a big one. So you need DR. You want to be able to fail over, get over your on-prem environment. You can do that natively to Azure. You can leverage AVS. We've been talking a lot about Azure VMware solution. Great product. You're used to using Azure or VMware, and you're used to doing vMotions and replicating machines, maybe with Site Recovery Manager or other third-party replication tools. You can use those and move those into AVS or Azure Site Recovery. Start replicating right to Azure native. Tom talked a lot about partners using your existing tooling. You don't need to use Azure Firewall. If you don't know the product or there's some gaps in the functionality, you can bring your Palo Alto, you can bring your FortiGate, you can bring your Checkpoint. Lots of different partners that have marketplace offerings, third-party NVAs run as your security product that are going to help you be comfortable in adopting that new technology because you're already trained, your staff knows those products. Obtain Microsoft EOS. So this is a big topic right now. I'm having conversations about this every day. Server 2012 and 2012 R2 end of support as of October, if you're not familiar. So what does that mean? You're not getting critical security patches on those workloads. A lot of these systems can't be upgraded. There's a lot of 2012 out in the wild still. So how do you solve that? You decom those servers, you upgrade them in 2016, 2019, you buy extended support. Now, if you purchase extended support, it can get costly. You can deploy it through Azure Arc, which I'll talk to a little bit. But a key benefit of migrating to Azure is free ESU. So you can bring that 2012 server. You don't have to pay anything. Automatically unlocks those security packages, and you're good to go from that point on. Alternatively, you can upgrade in place through Azure Migrate. That's a preview feature right now. Kick off the migration. It'll boot up a test VM and upgrade it into 2016, validate the workload, finalize the migration. You're done. Not only do you not have to purchase ESU, you've now modernized that OS for that VM. So that's a great feature. Rapidly move to the cloud, mergers and acquisitions. Again, these are more deadline based. So you got a colo lease coming up, you got a data center, you got to evacuate, you got hardware refresh cycle, you got licensing refresh for your VMware, or maybe you're looking at switching your VDI from a third party to an Azure Virtual Desktop. Those kind of deadlines are decision makers to start maybe looking at more of the OpEx model, start going to Azure. And again, consuming those native. So this one's specifically within VMware for AVS that deck is. But yeah, DC migrations, consolidations, like I was saying, acquisitions and divestitures. Azure makes a very nice way to start moving resources around. And if another company that you acquire is already on Azure, it's a pretty seamless process a lot of times to migrate those resources on a subscription move. Next slide, please. So this one we talked about, I was just talking ESU and support. So going into that a little bit more, the last point there's ESU enabled Arc enabled ESU for 2012. So what that means, if you're not familiar with Azure Arc, it's bringing the management control plane of Azure down to your data center or other cloud. So if you're in AWS, GCP, if you're on-prem, many colos, install the Arc agent. You can onboard to ESU. You don't have to do that Mac-based activation like you used to for 2008 when that went into life. It's a lot easier. It's month to month. You can true down as you're decomming and upgrade systems to control those costs a little bit more instead of locking into that 1 year cost. So again, that end of life is a big topic right now. Your best benefits moving to Azure. Next best option is doing that Arc enabled ESU, which Insight's happy to have that conversation, as are we at Microsoft directly. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this we talked a lot about, and again, this is especially with AVS and those third-party products, leveraging your investments in skills and tools. So you got engineers and admins and architects that already know vSphere. They're ingrained in it. They're certified. You don't want to just abandon that. So that's a great way to use AVS or Nutanix. You can do Nutanix in Azure now too. Alternatively, you can move to Azure native, and there's a lot of learning paths, a lot of skilling paths out there. And it's industry standard as you're hiring and attracting new talent. These people coming in are going to know Azure. And if you're not using it in a lot of cases, it might be a detractor, and they might want to go look at another company that, that they're more comfortable with, knowing that, hey, I can use these Azure skills that I've already developed. Using Azure Hybrid Use Benefit for licensing, it's the cheapest way that you can license Windows Server and Windows SQL in Azure. If you already own the licensing with software assurance, you can bring your licenses to Azure. Azure Virtual Desktop, we talked VDI a little bit. Remote work is huge. It's kind of ramping down a little bit, but it's still very prevalent, and a lot of people that adopted it are just full-time on AVD now. You can run Windows 10 and Windows 11 in a multi-user environment in a VDI host. Only place you can do that is natively in Azure. You don't have to pay for licensing there. You don't need RDS CALs. You don't need to worry about supporting the backend management plane. You're basically just delivering desktops and apps to users with a familiar Windows 10 and 11 environment that they're used to, which is really nice. And then once you get to Azure, you can start modernizing to apps. You can bring in app services. You can bring in other platform services. And once it's in Azure, you can use things like private endpoint and various network injections to start tying that in and have that hybrid approach where you have regular VMs running in infrastructure. Maybe it's an AVS, maybe it's Nutanix. Those can reach across into Azure native across the Microsoft backbone, have a very low latency, high bandwidth connectivity to those services. Next slide, please. Yeah, so, and as Tom was alluding to, planning is key, right? So we want to start out on the right foot. We want to plan, do an assessment, understand the workloads, understand what's talking to what. You can do dependency analysis mapping. You might not know, what front ends are talking to the SQL backend. Tooling like Azure Migrate can help you identify that. And even if you're not looking at migrating, it might open your eyes to some of the dependencies you weren't aware about. You're doing Power BI, you're doing a lot of BI stuff. What data sources are being hit by a cloud PBI? And now maybe we move that data source on up to the cloud, and you have less bandwidth, you can deliver reports faster, that sort of thing. And then this one too, again, is AVS, but managing after the fact, the screenshot there. After you deploy, obviously there's management. So there's skilling around that. There's you can leverage partners with SOC service, manages SOC. Security is huge right now. Defender XDR, Sentinel, Insight. You can partner with them, and they can help manage your Defender suite. And not only in Azure, but then M365, Defender for Endpoint. All the various Microsoft security functions kind of integrate with each other. Once you're on that E5 level, it starts making a lot of sense. There's benefit to get Sentinel involved, benefit for Defender for Cloud to get involved, and you start realizing savings. You get single pane of glass. You get more clarity around your security posture, which I think is huge this day and age when we're talking all of the threats out there. Next slide, please. I think we're getting into customer stories here. So this is around data and AI, and we can talk customer stories. There's all sorts of customer stories out there on Microsoft's website and Insight's website. You can go and look at the success that various customers have had, and a lot of it's around modernization, right? So what we're talking here today, to get that foot into Azure, maybe do a lift and shift, you do an assessment, you do IaaS, and then that just opens the door to a whole array of various projects that you can do and leverage Insight. They can pull in their team that's machine learning focused or AI focused or data Power BI focused, and start delivering to your user base, your customers internally and externally, a lot quicker than you probably could if you were on-prem and working with that. And next slide, please. I think we have one more customer story on there. That one skipped ahead a little bit, but we can review the deck later. I think on that last customer story, when I was reading through the deck, the literally saving, extending lives. It was a medical, approximately 100 additional days of life per patient. That's huge. Like, you're actually adding life to a person based on technology. So that's really the goal. I mean, to enable customers and entities to do more. So next slide. You can go ahead. And Tom, I'll kick it back to you if you want to talk about this nice offer that Insight's provided here.
Yeah, so this is an offer, excuse me, around VM migrations. It's really a nice offering because it's a complementary kind of migration up to 150 VMs. There's a limited time on this, by the way, till December 31st. But it's really to help you meet your demands. Insight is offering this special limited time deal on VM migration. It increases your efficiency, improves security, et cetera, saves you costs. To be honest, I think this is a fantastic deal because there's a lot of folks that are dealing or talking around the ESU type of thing. And maybe this is an option for clients that are really looking to figure out, what do I do right now? I've got a whole bunch of 2012, and to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised. You probably still got some 2008 systems, right? Or surprisingly, some customers older. But this is of course subject to a program qualification. But use the QR code there, get more details. It'll pop you into a page that you'll be able to read more about this. But I think it's a fantastic program. Of course, it's only 150 virtual machines, but hey, get you started and you get to experience what we're talking about. How do we help you plan those types of things, and understand the value of getting into Azure. So this is actually I think a great program.
And that limited time offer, I believe, is for registration, right? We're not saying you need to land those VMs in Azure. Obviously, Correct. We're going to plan it and assess it and figure it out. But if you jump on that before the end of the year here, you're going to save yourself a lot of money.
Correct. And thank you for that clarification. I should have mentioned that. It's for making sure that you sign up and go through and look at it. And then we'll start that program qualification process. And then, of course, the migrations can happen after that. So next step, use the QR code here, schedule a consultation with us today. We'd be happy to. It might not be me myself. I'm happy to join if you feel that I'm the guy. But we have plenty of capable people here at Insight and Microsoft, of course, that we can bring to the table and help you wherever you're at in your journey, or whatever your challenges are that you're trying to work through, ESU or whatever that could be. We can help you. Believe me, we've seen it, and we'll help you through those processes, and no matter how big, small, or what the challenge is.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. And just to add on to that on the Microsoft side, obviously, reach out to Insight, get a hold of your customer rep there. We also have account teams at the Microsoft side, happy to help out with. You might already have an aligned account specialist, Azure specialist, or an account executive. Reach out to them to start having a conversation. Then we can partner with Insight. There's a lot of cross collaboration between our various teams. So happy to help with whatever capacity we can on the account team at Microsoft.